Okay, today we're going to be building a coco antenna. It's a shortened name for a coaxial collinear, and it's going to be this design here, which was originally on the or where I borrowed it from, the Australian CB website. The page here is showing the Radio Experimenter's Handbook. Anyway, basically what's going to happen, you can see this too well, but we're after this. Basically each one of these is a half wavelength long, and it's separated by a half wave, so in theory it should give you maximum gain. In practice, yeah, it's a reduced size antenna because we have to take into account the velocity factor of your coax being used. Now generally, if you're using RG58, RG213, by the way, there's no reason not to use RG58 unless you don't have any, because it's cheap and cheerful. I know everyone's screaming, oh, but the losses, but the losses. This is an antenna, not coax. Right, so that's that done with. Going back to velocity factor though, we should mention you do need to know the velocity factor of your coax you're using. Generally, if it's the plasticky inner RG58, it's 66% or 0.66 velocity factor. If it's the foamy inner, it can be as much as 84%. If you generally don't know, but you've got some, but you have a nano VNA, there's the option in the software in nano VNA to detect velocity factor. Gives you quite a good answer. Also, if you have an antenna analyzer, basically you just cut a set length. Normally it's about I don't know, a couple of meters, and you work out where it should become resonant on a quarter wave and where it actually comes resonant. I say resonant, where the dip is anyway, and the difference obviously you work out is the velocity factor of your coax. Okay, with that in mind, this particular design, I don't think you can see it too well on the screen because this this print's a bit blurred as well, but basically there's two measurements on here. One's for 70 centimeters, one's for the Australian CB band, which is on 477 megahertz. So that's either I think, if I'm rightly, this is cut for 435 maybe. Oh sorry, 436.5. It does say down here 436.5, which is okay actually. It's probably okay for use on 446. Matter of fact, it does say very specifically in the piece down the bottom here that the bandwidth is quite broad and you can get away with around 8%, so it's about 5 millimeters. 8% allows for 35 megahertz of bandwidth, so that's 17.5 meg either side of 436.5, which is is not a mean feat. But when I say 17 meg, I mean, yeah, the SWR could be quite high. Could be well in excess of 1.8 for a fair percentage of that. So yeah, I'll show you the tools that I'm going to be using, and some that I have. Right, so I've got this sheet of paper and it comes out my printer, and basically it saves using one of these, because every time I cut with one of these, yeah, I get random lengths. The other thing I've also got is one of these. Now this is cut to a set. This is actually a 3D print, and you shove your coax down the middle and you just chop it to the ends. I'm not going to be using that today though. We're going to be using traditional style. I've also got one of these, which is a coax stripper, and I can promise you it makes these jobs very easy. And actually these things are only a couple of quid on eBay. While your blades are sharp, these are fantastic. Also got one of these and some Commodore Garden RG58. Right, with that I'm going to stop recording, and I'm going to get my RG58 out. Right, we have the RG58 now. There it is. And we're going to go back to this design. I'm just going to try and mention what's going on here. Right, the length from this point to this point is 222 millimeters. Now, what that is, or near as, damn it, the speed of light, which we're actually going to divide down, because we can simplify that to 300 divided by the frequency in megahertz is 446, gives a wavelength of 0.6726 meters. 0.6726 meters multiplied by the velocity factor of our coax. Now, as I said to you, the one that I'm using is 66%, but this is the point you would alter, and it gives then a wavelength of 44, sorry, yes, the wavelength of 44.4 centimeters, 0.44 meters. Now, what's happening there is that the actual velocity factor, the wavelength, is which is mentioned here, is as magnetic energy travels slower in the dialect of the coaxial cable, the wavelength is physically shorter. Okay, so as we then want half waves, we then wish to divide that by 2 to get this number here, which is 22.2 centimeters, or 0.222 meters, or 222 millimeters to the rest of us. Right, so what are the other lines here, and you know, and whatnot? Well, basically what's going on, if we go back to our design, is this here. At the end we need to make a joining stub. Now, the actual element length, does it say about the element length? Somewhere it says about the element length anyway, is the distance between the braiding. Okay, so from where the braiding ends to the other end where the braiding ends, which should be exactly 222 millimeters for 0.66 velocity factor, it is what we're after. This little bit here, which is 3 millimeters, is a plastic spacer. It's a bit of the centered dialect is actually what it is. It just stops our antenna shorting. And this 8 millimeters, I think this is actually quite long. I normally don't make mine 8 millimeters, but you've got to remember that most of this 3 millimeters will go here. Another probably 3 millimeters of the next element will go here. So where it's 8 millimeters, there's 6 gone straight away, and 2 needs to go back onto this part here. Now, also you see that they've cut back 5 millimeters here, and obviously this is going to happen at the other end, except for the top element, because the top element you're just going to cut there and leave it open. Right, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, this 5 millimeters here, I don't normally do this, cut it back, and to be fair, I actually think it's done more for show. What I tend to do is, if I just take my coaxial here, I'll explain. Literally a bit more than that. Just do that both ends, blob of solder down there, and then hook it over onto there. I don't see the point of taking all that off, absolutely pointless. Obviously try not to take too much of that off. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to start chopping in a second. Right, I've actually got my phone resting on top of the cable spool there. Right, for anyone out there who just takes a pair of cutters and goes snip, yeah, or a ruler and shoves it up against it and goes, yeah, that's the right measurement. Yeah, give up now. Yeah, we're all wasting each other's time here. The measurements need to be reasonably accurate. They don't have to be spot on, but reasonably accurate. So this is where my cutting guide has come in. We need to lay it flat on the paper, take the kinks out of outer things, and chop down onto the line like so. Why am I using a Stanley knife to cut through this? Why am I not using say a pair of cutters or whatever? If you can see that, that's what I'm after, is a nice round end. I don't want any kinks or rubbish like that. They will all affect its size. So we're just going to put a couple of scores on our coax. And why are we doing that? Obviously we're going to take the outer off and the inner off. So you can do it with this tool. It's quite it's quite time consuming. You can do it with this tool. It saves quite a bit of time actually, and I'm a lazy git. So I'm just going to try and work out where my scores are and compare to the blade, which is just about there. Press down. I'm going to spin it round. Why am I doing it so many times? Blade's probably a bit blunt on this whole thing. Right, and now we take it off. Oh, lovely. Look at that. And I don't know whether you can see that, but that is what you're after. Okay. I've actually made it a bit short, I think. Okay, I realised that, like a fool, I cut on the wrong line. So this is where the blade comes in. A very sharp knife doing this. You'd probably use a very sharp end pair of scissors or something to do this job, to clean it up. But what you don't want to do is eat into the braid. So we're just going to go back to the other end and show you roughly what you're after. Don't want to put two cuts in it now, to be quite honest with you. Okay, we're just rolling it around, and off it all comes. Look at that. That is fantastic. And if we take it here, there, well, you can see that on camera, there is what we're after. Okay. This is what you're not after. So I'm just going to tart this up. Actually, I'll do it off camera because it'll probably take a little while. If you're doing it with this, expect a good 5 minutes or so tidying these up to that kind of degree, which is what you are after. For anyone watching, can highly recommend one of these. Okay, here we are back now. We're just checking our dimensions. Didn't take 5 minutes, but it's not quite as clean. Oh, Blast, that's exactly what I didn't want while I was recording there. And we've then got to leave a couple of mil on here. So we're then going to take our sharp knife and we're going to be gently just score this around here. And the same again for this end. Remember the fact that although I'm using just one end to do this on, it is the same both ends. We are going to check our dimensions afterwards, and we do that by this. Bingo, that is what you are after. Okay, so we need another 7 of these, sorry, we need another 6 of these, and then the last one would look exactly like this one end, but on the top I'd literally just chop it down there. Yeah, it wouldn't have this top bit on. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm now going to where we see that, I'm now going to create a few more of those. I'll do that off camera because this is be very boring for everyone. Okay, we've now got 7 elements, and believe you me, they are the right length. Right, the 8th element again needs to be the right length. So what do we need to do with the 8th element? Well, you've got the top line, which is going to be like this and this, but we don't want this on the top element, so we just want to cut it fat. So actually we're going to use flat, that was cut it fat. Anyway, we're going to use this line this time. Now, how long did those elements take me to knock up? I'm guessing they took me about 3 or 4 minutes each, and I do say I'm guessing. If you were using the standing knife method, easily double that. Jesus, my blade's blunt already. Just put a new blade in there. Right, so what we now should have is one join element up to the 222mm, which we have. So we're now just going to score to make the join, so I can see where I can use my cutting tool with. Remember, you can do this, but if I just do that a few times, and I do it a few times just to make sure more than anything, then we should find that this has got a thing up. Now, what we don't want are these strands here. There we go, and that is a top element. So we're just going to then make our 2mm spacer, or 3. I think it was 3 on this design, wasn't it? Yeah, 3. So that our end looks like that. Now, generally they advise to put a blob of silicone on this. I'm not going to be siliconing this antenna up, nor am I going to be using heat shrink. A, because I want to test it, and B, because I want you to see what's going on. Right, so what's actually going to happen is we are going to solder get it on camera, our pieces together like so. Right, and how we're going to do that, we're just going to make little nicks, Stevie nicks if you like, in the end here of our outer braid. Now, what we want to do is, if we take a piece like this, we put a nick there, but we put a nick there as well. We don't put a nick there, pick it up, turn it around, put a nick on the other side. Basically, if you do that, you'll twist the coax. So, with it laying flat, nick there, yeah, or nick there, but both on the same side, if you like. I know it's cylindrical, but you'll get the idea. I'm just going to heat my soldering iron up now, because I'm going to create the V's before I do that, and then we're just going to get that back in shot there. Get these tinned up, and then we can solder them all together. Right, I'm just going to explain what's going on here. See if I can get that in focus. There we go. What you're after is your end braid without any bits dangling off it. And we're going to tin that, and we're going to tin that, and there's the other end. Exactly the same, except for the top. Right. What we don't want is any straggly bits joining these together. You might think, well, I'm going to join those together. Why am I not allowed straggly bits? It's because actually these two, you can actually take a multimeter and test every segment of the antenna from inner to outer, from top to bottom, and sorry, from the same level, you know, from the inner to the outer, and you never should have a dead short. It's a test for this antenna. Okay, so we need to do this fairly quick. What we don't want is there we go. What we don't want is to melt anything here. So basically we're just going to go blob. Yep, that's on there, and tin. Yeah, lovely. Blob and tin. Okay, so if you've got a good old blob on there, let's see if I can get that in focus. That's fine, because that's kind of what you're after, because that's actually going to hold it together in the end. So I'm just going to tin up all these. Let's get that, see if I can get that in focus. Oh, the quality phone this is. There we go, and I'll start joining them up and you see what's going on. Okay, so I'm back quickly now just to prove a point. They're all done now, but what you're after is that. Okay, if this is all bubbled and crapped, then you've held it on there for too long, which is never a good sign. Okay, so what we're now going to do is, you see, let's see if we're in focus, make sure we're in focus. Doesn't look like we are. There we go. Basically we're going to turn this side down onto this side, and this one's going to go onto there like that. So this is quite an easy little thing really, because all we're going to do is just heat up one very quickly again, so it melts through to the bottom like that. Turn it over. Don't know whether I'm getting that on camera, hopefully I am. And do that. And we're after a joint that looks like that. Now, we're advised that we use silicone on this joint and heat shrink to waterproof it, but nevertheless it does need to be waterproofed. So I'm just going to throw the other joints together like that. Oh, let's see if I can get that back on camera, and that'll be the Coax collinear built. Then we just then need the feed point and the decoupling. Right then, there's all our elements soldered together. Now I keep going, la, 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 right to the end. Now, you notice I'm being a bit delicate with these, because you know, they are quite delicate. And to prove a point now, it's interesting. I'm going to take my multimeter, and we're just going to attach it to the point here, to the point here, and if I just short it on itself, but no short between there. But I should be able to check it all the way up the coax, into out, into out, into out, and it should be working. So I suppose next point is to make a feed point, and possibly start attaching it to our radom in this case. It's going to be a bit of plastic pipe with with some cable ties, some cheap and cheerful cable ties. Right, and now we've tested our antenna. He says he can't find his, oh yeah, there it is, his lighter. Got some heat shrink. Now, heat shrink, what's going to happen with a heat shrink? Ideally, you'd put some silicone on it before you heat shrink it. Try not to use too much heat at this point. I'm just going to close the window. Why do we not want to use too much heat? Well, A, because we've got a solder joint under there, and B, because it's coax, we don't want to damage either. And yeah, you're kind of after those. So I'm just going to run that along all my joints. Right, at this point, the only thing I can suggest is that you make sure everything's waterproof. It needs to be in a fairly straight line. The straighter the better. Now you notice I've left the bottom off. I'm a bit worried that my radom's a bit short as well. But the other thing is that the piping you use, make sure it's RF opaque, meaning that it's not containing any graphite or anything, because it will heavily affect the antenna, SWR and everything. So but yeah, that's the beast. I'm about to hook up a feed point in a minute. Hopefully I've got enough space on the end there to shove a feed point. If not, what I might do is use a choke instead, you know, turns of coax, but I don't really want to do that because we're trying to follow the design here. Right, there, we're moving on to our feed point. We've got a length, it's a random length actually, of RG58 here. That wasn't good. Now, anyone wanting to use anything other than RG58 at this point, especially if you're using it as a base antenna, you're probably only going to want maybe a meter at this point. It's just a little pigtail to attach to the bottom of your antenna, maybe less than a meter. Okay, this is where our quarter wave in air is going to come in, because that's where we want to add our decoupling points. But before we do that, what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to make another piece on the end of this coax to join to our bottom of our section of our antenna, and we're going to do that with our old faithful friend again, in the same way that we joined the other sections. So on that goes at the same point to the same point. Yeah, a bit overkill there, but we want it all off. And there we go. Bit of a tidy up there. Didn't quite get that. Right then, as before, from where the braid starts, is the element length. So what we want from there downwards is 168 millimeters. That is a quarter wavelength in air. So I have read on some designs that they use a quarter wave in Coax. Yeah, I suppose you possibly could, but I've never had any luck with that. I've just scored it to mark it. And what I'm also going to do, same as before, is make a V in this, because that's what our antenna is going to solder onto at that point. And then at our 16.8mm point, our decoupling radials are going to. And what we're going to use, if we go back to our design here, by the way, I should have mentioned this right at the start, but we're actually making the 8 element version. You could make the 4, you could make 12, 16, but generally you double up. Now I see you saying, well, why not just go straight away and make a 32 or a 64, you know, if you've got the space. It's all about beam width, you know. Just because you're doubling up on the elements and making a higher gain, the beam width, it gets very narrow, you know, and as such, you could just be shooting straight over the people, or straight under, you know, straight into the side of a dip if you're in a dip. So sometimes the 4 element actually works better than the 8. The 8's got more gain than the 4, but you know, you need to take into account beam width as well. So decoupling rods, if I can just get these in the thing, that's these things here. We're going to solder these across the outer braid, and we're just going to use this. I have this. I suppose technically you could use the inner of some RG213. That's quite a solid thing, but you need something that's going to hold itself up and be solderable, really. So hence why I've got these welding rods. Okay, so there is our same solder joint we've used to connect our coax up to the bottom element. We're just going to heat shrink that. Remember that you know, the designs does say to use something to waterproof it underneath, you know, some silicone. And at the 16.8mm point, which is about halfway between this that I cut off, we're going to solder 2 brazing rods at 45 degrees, sorry, at 90 degrees apart. So they're going to make radials, and yeah, that is pretty much going to be the finished antenna. We're just going to add a plug to it, and then we'll test it out. Right, one thing I didn't mention is the length of the brazing rods for 446, of course. Yeah, there's not too much sort of indicator as to what this is supposed to be, but using the formula of a half wave in free air, add a couple of millimeters on to that, gives it about 355 mil. So you just want it a little bit shorter than the 77 version, but yeah, I would say between 355 and 360. Sorry, 355 and 350, but I'm going to make this 355 2 of, and that's it. And I'm going to solder it halfway along the 355. Right, for the more astute of you thinking that's not the same antenna, it actually is. What I've done is I've moved the antenna up because of the feed point here, which is now at a nice angle, was too low. It was literally right on the end here, and I'll need some strength. So I've just moved the antenna up a bit. So yeah, I mean that's not ideal, but it is just a test antenna. It is something I'm probably going to use portable actually. But there it is. Unfortunately for me, these are 2 meter lengths, and at some point I remember cutting these down for another purpose. I was actually making a biquad for 11 meters with these as the stable, and this is probably one that I've cut down. Probably only taken I don't know, 20 or so centimeters off, but that was all. So if you do something like this, just make sure that you have some way of keeping it straight as well, because it needs to be straight. This antenna needs to be straight. Right, we're just going to shove a plug on and test it.